This is the Regional Futures Conference, and it's also part funded by the ERC, European Research Council. It's a 5-year project, also called Regional Futures. And we are in the end of the 4th year of a 5-year project, and this we felt was the right time to hold a conference because we have done with all our fieldwork, and we're in a process where we're thinking, analyzing, and writing about our work. So today what I want to do is we have about 20 minutes or so, and I want to just run through the conference and the conference theme, and then we can start immediately afterwards with our keynotes. And I just wanted to say a warm welcome to all of you. I know you've all come from various places in the world, and we're really, really lucky and privileged to have you all here and get your undivided attention. The way that we have also organized this conference is to make it not huge. I know it feels quite tight here with so many of you, but we wanted to keep presentations and enough time for discussion. So this will be our motto today and tomorrow is to have as much conversations as possible between ourselves, not just in the Q&A, but also, of course, during those moments when we have coffee and lunch and dinner. So let me just start with explaining about the Regional Futures Project, and then that leads on to the conference. I'm joined also by my colleagues here in UCL, Fenna, who you would have, and Mariana, who you would have seen emails from or been seen CC'd, and of course the lovely Sarah, who I think is outside checking you all in. Yes, there she is, who has been amazing in terms of organizing everything and making things moving smoothly. So this is the Regional Futures Project, and of course the conference is named after that. That's the website, Regional Futures, in case you want to go and have a look. So just to kind of introduce the project, it's, as I said, a European Research Council funded project, and we basically have 6 research questions at the intersections of 5 themes. So the columns are the 2 themes of digitalization and urbanization, and the rows are 3 themes around digitalizing state, information infrastructure, and territorial politics. So each of these questions are what we have been engaging in the last 4 years, trying to answer, and we have a big team, about 13 people, including myself. And we have been currently doing research in, well, 3 continents, but of course we are located in UCL. So the regions that we've been looking at is Mexico, the metropolitan area of Guadalajara, in Kenya, Nairobi metropolitan area, in India, Mumbai metropolitan area. And in this project, we've been basically very interested in understanding the dynamics between digitalization and urbanization, particularly in the ways that they unfold in the peripheries of these metropolitan regions. And what we call in this project digitalization as urbanization, that the push towards digitalization in the metropolitan peripheries is also a way of enabling urbanization. And the rapid urbanization in the metropolitan peripheries is also an imperative then for the state to digitalize in order to see these new territories. And of course, we are here up there at the top in UCL. So the Regional Future or RegFoot team members, they're all here in the room, apart from a few of them who couldn't make it for various reasons, one being visa. So we have Juan, where are you? There's Juan Angel de Meritis, Abdul Shaban from India, Juan from Mexico, and Catherine, I don't know if Catherine's here yet, Catherine Gatteri, who you will see, she's also here from BIA in Kenya. And then so they are the collaborators in the different local teams. And then, of course, in UCL, we have Fenna, who you've met, and Mariana. And then in BIA in Kenya, Dennis Mutama, who couldn't make it because of visa issues. Jesus Flores from Mexico, who also couldn't make it because he's just got a new job. But he's there with us in spirit because we owe a lot to him in terms of data collection and thinking with us. And then Neha Gupta from Mumbai, there she is, in the India team. So that's our 5 postdocs, and then also our research assistants and postdoctoral researchers. Eric Okoyo, who's again in Kenya, he hasn't been able to come. Kea Kunte, who is, where are you, Kea? There she is. She's a postgrad researcher also doing her PhD in the Regional Futures Project. And Raul Agraz, where is Raul? Not here yet. He's our research assistant in Mexico. And there's, of course, myself, principal investigator. So that's a big team, and most of them are here, and you'll see them in the course of these 2 days. So before we start into the conference, I'd like to just present some selected findings from our project so far. They're very, very selected, but these are things that we are analyzing, writing about, and also would like to think along with you through these 2 days, because you will also see presentations from different members of the team in these 2 days. Okay, so the first one, I realize this slide is looking a bit busy. The first one is, of course, trying to have a critical understanding of digital, territorial, and social transformations in the metropolitan peripheries. And I'm very pleased to announce our new book. Myself and Fenna, we've edited, and some people here are also in our chapter authors, and it's called Informational Peripheries, and I think that's really the crux of what we have been analyzing in terms of digitalization as urbanization. So digitalization as urbanization are initiatives that are geared towards land assetization and urbanization by expanding the reach and impact of the digitalizing state. And there are a number of publications that we have already and also writing further. Then another one that we are now giving more attention and writing more about is digitalization as a form of statecraft. And here I just want to announce our book under contract. It's now, we've submitted the full manuscript and it's under review, and that's an edited book between me and Mariana Reyes Carranza, and it's called Control, Shift, Govern, Technologies of State Power in the Digital Age, and it's by Manchester University Press. And there's a few other publications from the team that we've been writing about digitalization. And so here, this is a picture from the Kajiado GIS lab. Kajiado is a peripheral municipality in Kenya. Digitalizing state is how we understand a shift towards a technocratization of governance by digitalizing land administration on the one hand and changing the ways that information is collected, stored, standardized, categorized, visualized, and represented on the other hand. The third one, again, it's more new and emerging, but we've been thinking about this a lot more than it was there in the actual research proposal, is the idea of labor. So we see a lot of peripheral labor, intermediaries, and what Patrick Levy calls the para-state emerging. And that really blurs the boundaries between what is the state, what is the private sector, what are these kind of informal actors. And again, we've been publishing about this, writing about this, and there's a lot more that we are still writing. And this is the kind of people who work within the state, who are very precarious labor, paid very little, and yet they become part of the state. So it really kind of questions and challenges the point about labor and digitalization as automation within the state. Another theme that's emerging, again, we're paying more attention to now and writing more about, is the question of timing and temporalities. And the question of timing has become really interesting because, of course, the policies, initiatives, the implementation of various policies of digitalization have a certain timeline attached to them, but these timelines are also strategic in order to have maximum effect. So we're thinking about this as a digital fantasy, which is about establishing a temporal order and is reflected in the grandiose ambitions of the state towards land digitalization. The temporal ordering is not by chance, but by design, and the timing of policies, initiatives, and fantasies remain a strategy of statecraft. So we're thinking more about this, and perhaps there'll be more coming in the future that we're writing on it. And we're really, again, pleased to say that Fenna and I published a couple of articles in Dialogues in Digital Society, thanks to Rob inviting us to do so, about timing and temporalization. And then the final one, this is very initial stages. There are a lot of papers that actually are kind of 80% completed, so I don't really have anything to show for now, but this is something we're getting even more into. Again, something that wasn't there so explicitly in the original proposal. The question about AI and algorithmic regional features. We see this a lot with particularly land digitalization platforms in different ways, that land digitalization is automated, starting from small algorithms, small formula, to bigger thinking about, there's a picture of the background, using VR, etc., to manage property licenses, etc. So what we're finding is that AI remains an aspirational discourse in state departments that are often derailed by their inability to pool together the necessary technologies and human resources to make this possible. But AI also is not just a fantasy. There's various initiatives, various small and big approaches in trying to incorporate and embed this in everyday bureaucracy, everyday government workflows. So AI is used in specific parts of land digitalization projects, which we are also examining in the fieldwork and writing about. So one of the things I think that has come about in our project is we have increasingly focused on land because early on we thought through this and we realized that land is actually the frontier of urbanization. Of course, we know this, but it's become even more focused by the digitalizing state that we need more land, because without land there is no urbanization, but also without land there is no AI, because of course cloud and digitalization needs very material territories in order to happen. So land became earlier on a very important aspect and focus of this project, and so we've really focused on land digitalization, but even apart from land digitalization, we've looked at the bureaucracy around it and the changing in workflows and the reorganization of departmental workflows and departmental connectivity, particularly with the state. For me personally, it's been a real learning experience because it's a very new area for me. In my whole career, I've focused more on communities, so this has been a change of gear, looking more at the state, but it's been an extremely exciting learning experience. And we'll talk about this more tomorrow, where we have a more focus on the lessons learned from the Frankfurt project. And then finally, this is a work package. Again, we are kind of halfway through it, and this is where we are now focusing on to complete our fieldwork. It is on the indigenous territorial politics. And this is mainly led by our researchers, postgrad researchers and research assistants, of course, with oversight from myself and collaborators. And the indigenous territorial politics have become important because in the metropolitan peripheries, where is land? Land is usually held in indigenous communities. It's usually commons land, and it's usually land that has been under de facto ownership by marginalized communities. So when land is assetized, when land is put on a digital platform, it connects very clearly to ownership paradigms, which obviously creates big challenges for indigenous communities. So the territorial politics is where we are looking at in terms of how digitalization and urbanization might happen from below, perhaps in ways that was not envisaged by these land digitalization platforms. So in Kenya, we're looking at the Maasai community who are being increasingly displaced, whose land is being increasingly privatized, subdivided, and sold off. In Mexico, we're looking at the Comunidad Indígena, who are again in the peripheries of Guadalajara, who are facing similar challenges. And in India, it's very interesting because this is not really indigenous politics, but it's an old kind of deindustrializing town, a powerloom sector, and also very high Muslim community, which creates a different kind of challenge and different kind of struggles for them to reclaim their rights to land, reclaim their rights to citizenship and basic infrastructure. So that's a whirlwind tour of where we are right now and some of the findings from this project. And I'm sure I've left out many things, but hopefully in our conversations these 2 days with the team and with some of the presentations, more will become clear. We do look forward to your feedback as well. And then coming to the conference questions and themes. In this conference, because it's also part of the Regional Futures project, we are guided by 3 questions, which I'm sure all of you are now familiar with. It was in the conference call. The first one being, how does digitalization ensure the management, shaping, and capture of new territories for regional urbanization? So this, of course, goes back to the question of digitalization as urbanization. The second one is, how does the digitalizing state drive the need for new technologies and networks of seeing, what we call the vision machines, or has been called the vision machines by Paul Virilio, the drones, the satellite imagery, the remote sensing, etc. And then third, of course, this is the territorial politics. How do marginal communities use technologies to negotiate, adapt, contest, and disrupt urbanization? So these 3 key themes, I'm sure all of you will see yourself somewhere fitting in one or more of these questions. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations that emerge from here. The conference itself has got these broad themes, and each of you have been slotted into each theme. That doesn't mean that you fit perfectly, and you don't have to. But we saw themes emerging around digital governance and state power as a very strong theme. Platforms and digital territories, then digital mapping, data assemblages and regional governance, gender, body politics, and resistance in the digital age. And then we're extremely lucky to have a practitioners panel and a practitioner keynote, which is, I feel, a real privilege in academic conferences. We also have a postgraduate lightning round where postgraduate researchers will talk about their relationship with these questions. And then, of course, we have a small panel from all the team members talking about the lessons from Regional Futures Project. And then these pictures here, I'm sure, are no stranger to these people. They don't need any introduction at all. They are kind of key figures in this space and in this theme of the conference, and the prolific publications from them leave little space for introduction, but I will still kind of highlight that we are extremely privileged to have 5 fantastic keynote speakers. Today we have Ursula Rao, right after this introduction, and Rob Kitchen sitting there. And tomorrow we have Pontus Westerberg. Ursula Rao is from Max Planck, and Rob Kitchen is from University of Maynooth. Pontus, tomorrow's starting keynote is UN Habitat and where is Pontus? Oh, there you are. UN Habitat and Public Teaching, right? And Simon Marvin, who is between Sheffield and Sydney. And then, of course, Nancy. And so these people have been extremely kind and extremely generous. Nancy being, again, half-time between University of Cape Town and University of Basel. You've given your time, you've given us your attention, and you've traveled all the way here. So thank you again very much. We really look forward to learning from you. So we have about 10 minutes between now and the start of Ursula's talk, but I will introduce Ursula, and then you can set yourself up. So our first keynote is from Ursula Rao, again, as I said, who needs no introduction. She is the director in Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology. Her research interests are in e-governance, biometric technology, state-citizen interaction, urban citizenship, social justice, journalistic practices, ritual theory, and, very interestingly, urban Hinduism in India. She is the director, as I said, of the Department of Anthropology of Politics and Governance at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle. Her research explores questions of politics and governance in India with a specific focus on urban dynamics. And currently she is involved in several research projects around the social consequences of biometric technology and e-governance. Despite all these illustrious CV, Ursula, she is also an amazingly generous and kind colleague. I could not state it more genuinely. She has been amazing support for our team. She's also in the advisory board in the Regional Futures Project. And she has so kindly given her time, not just to myself as a PI, but also to some of our team members in helping them and supporting them in their future careers. So thank you so much, Ursula, for coming here. And the floor is yours. There's about 5 minutes if you wanted to set it up, or if it's already set up, then we can make an earlier start. Is that okay? While you're starting up, maybe if there's any questions about the Regional Futures Project, I'm happy to answer. If not, we will take those questions during these next 2 days.
So I don't have any slides. Okay. You always have to bear with me and just...
Perfect.
The power of words, I call it.
We like that.
Thank you so much. I'll do this. Thanks for having me. This is. Do I need the microphone? I find it difficult to handle both of these kind of things at the same time. We don't have a stand, right, for the microphone?
No, it doesn't seem like it.
Okay, that is challenging.
Sure there is a mobile microphone. No, there isn't. Can people at the back hear us? Yeah, I think so.
Otherwise, what I'll do is kind of sit down and talk, because then I can rest this. Huh?
If you don't want to do it, I think it's fine.
It's fine like this? Is that okay? You okay? Okay, I'll just come a little closer. There are no pictures anyway. And then everyone can hear me. So there's can someone give me a 20-minute warning after
Sure.
20 minutes so that I can make sure I'm winding up? Now there's 3 things that I want to do with you today. One is I want to introduce kind of my reflections very briefly on digital public infrastructure, because I think it's time that we zoom out of all of these individual projects and consider like what is the digital public infrastructure, what's digital about it, what's public about it, what's the infrastructure in this. Now, while obviously I kind of do all of it, I want to make a first inroad into theorizing digital public infrastructures as digital public goods. And I want to link this to work I've done on policy as experimentation. I'll give you, so that it's not too theoretical, one little case study, can't do without as an anthropologist. It's more of an illustration of something that I want to demonstrate, more generally about the character of digital public infrastructures, or DPIs, I'll call them. And then anyway, there are some conclusions. So the medium is the message, formulated Marshall McLuhan famously to articulate that the medium through which communicative processes are organized has a significant impact on its content. In other words, there's a recursive relationship between form and content. I take up this very basic insight in a discussion that zooms out of any specific project to consider the recursive relationship between service and infrastructure. My occupation is with the effects of the increasingly totalizing presence of digital infrastructure on institutions and human relations. Or more specifically, I ask the question, how the material affordances of digital infrastructure impact public and private services, and how they shape the relationship between provider and consumer. So in other words, I'm basically thinking through the paradigmatic shift that we are affording by moving from writing to typing, which has been my occupation. And I think now, after 10, 15 years of intensive case study based, and so many people from different disciplines have contributed, we are at a point where we probably can say something about how the digital governance, and I'm referring not just to public governance, also to private governance, is kind of different from what writing affords. And this is my very first kind of sketchy attempt to get there. So from the mid-2000s onwards, vanguard states like Estonia and India started to vigorously digitize their services, setting a trend for all others to follow quickly, building complex systems that today sail under the name Digital Public Infrastructure, or DPIs. Following a UN definition, which was brought about, interestingly, by the G20 meeting in India, so Modi is kind of trying to here make an impact, digital public infrastructures are a set of shared digital systems that are secure and interoperable, built on open standards and promote access to services for all with governance and community as their core components. More than just a fact of life, today DPIs are discussed as public good. They are essential for the efficient management of populations and the transparent and equitable redistribution of resources, especially, of course, in middle and low-income countries, which also means that access to these DPIs must be guaranteed to ensure social justice and give citizens pathways for claiming their social rights. The term digital public infrastructure establishes a metaphorical equivalence between this new object and classical infrastructures, which are roads, dams, electricity grids. However, in a comparison to these, DPIs are fuzzy objects, since they are partly ephemeral and along with cable servers, computers consist of codes, standards, platforms, and application programming interfaces. Furthermore, DPAs are not a single entity. They don't have one materiality, but rather they are a stack of services, which makes it unclear which parts of any stack might be considered part of the DPIs and which not. More problematically than this boundary concerns of where do they actually start and where do they end, is the fact that they are increasingly dynamic entities that are subject to constant change due to regular technological updates, changes in regulatory environment, and shifts in concrete policies and programs. So, what does it mean for such an unstable object to be the new solid foundation and infrastructure of the making of a public good? Right? This is the big questions. This is the first attempt, so bear with me. Now, I'm linking this to, as I already told you, kind of my thinking around policy as experimentation. The making of a new foundational information infrastructure is recursively linked to another development that, while not originating in the digital revolution, has been greatly reinforced by it. This is the shift in governance from high modernist planning to curating open-ended processes. During the era of high modernism, this is kind of, when socialism, also kind of, was well and kicking. During the era of high modernism, great power was allocated to rationalist planning. The expectation was that scripted development, if applied systematically, could bring social processes under control and determine developments. However, such fantasies, as we know, of total control have collapsed in light of experiences with actual centralized planning, which often failed to reach its goals, led to unwanted side effects, fell short of its ambitions, and did not eliminate poverty or end suffering. Right? So, since the 1980s, rationalist planning has gradually been replaced by more dynamic planning. A style of planning I've called policy experimentation, which, however, is not just the hallmark of government planning. Far from it. In fact, it has arrived in the government in the years of new public management, which is when techniques of the private sector were now informing the way state was supposed to be managed. So governance in the mode of experimentation extends beyond the archetypical laboratory. Here, experimentation does not denote a highly controlled and replicable study that grounds scientific findings. Rather, it demarcates a social process that unfolds in real life. New projects might begin as pilots that should prove the concepts before they are then rolled out. However, mostly the test phase and actual implementation bleed into one another. Not least because scaling up a project, it has its own set of problems, so that at every stage, tweaks are introduced that alter the system with the goal of making it function better or make it function differently. These minor or major changes are often spoken about in the language of improvement, right? So there's a failure, you learn and you improve. Evoking, and this is the interesting continuity, evoking a modernist imagination of linear time, right? So we are no longer in modernist planning, but we still think that we are constantly improving, moving towards some telos, some kind of modernist kind of development kind of stage. So evoking the modernist imagination of linear time, the time of social improvement presents the future in aspirational terms as providing a pathways to this continuous betterment. In this framing, failure is the opposite of improvement, and yet at the same time it's integral to its working, right? So failure is supposed to be something that is always there, right? So how can improvement have failure, right? So there's actually no state of improvement, there's just a continuous conversation between failure and improvement, which also means there's no progress, something to think about. The perceived failures of previous developments provide the impetus for new initiatives, and insofar as they provide the necessary lessons to be learned for the future success, they figure as the essential stepping stones for evolutionary making of new systems. By keeping both processes in view simultaneously, the creation of chameleon-like new infrastructures and the contemporary style of open-ended planning, I theorize the public evoked by these new public infrastructures. As an anthropologist, I base my conclusions on paying close ethnographic attention to the ordinary everyday work of constituting DPIs. I contend that rather than providing a stable basis for service delivery or being the substance of a new right, DPIs are precarious achievements. As collaboratively produced systems, they crucially depend on digitally literate citizens who are inclined to continuously fill in a dynamic, quickly changing set of gaps in the highly dynamic, patchy new information infrastructure. So I'm interested in these gaps, right? So if every infrastructure fails to be improved, then that means that every time you do something, there's a failure which is basically manifest as gaps, and who has to patch over these gaps? 90% of the time it's the citizens. And if you deal with any app in your life, then you know what this feels like, right? My DB app, the German kind of train travel app, has not been working since 3 years, and I can give you the full story, and that would fill this nature. But I'll give you an example from India. On September 23, 2018, right? Modi, for his grand gesture, announces Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, this is new health insurance, is the biggest government-sponsored healthcare scheme in the world. The number of beneficiaries is almost equal to the population of Canada, Mexico, and the US together. And importantly, he adds that participation will be seamless. No need to register for the initiative. A health card will be provided to the beneficiary for availing of the benefit. Okay, now you go on the ground and you see what happens. I got astonished when 1 year later, that was the time of the pandemic then, I read a couple of articles and then more followed about Chhattisgarh, which is kind of a really developed welfare state within India, one of the states. They had kind of only an enrollment rate of something between 50 and 60. Now usually this would not be a worry because we know there are big announcements, and on the ground reality there's this gap. But in this case it was actually quite interesting because Chhattisgarh had been the insurance model state. So in other words, they've always had kind of more than 90% enrollment, and they have a tradition of enrolling in this. So the question is, why did the system collapse the moment that it was relaunched, right? So this new health insurance was not new, but was actually 10 years old, right? It was rebatched, made bigger, made more beautiful, re-announced and then had a different name, but ultimately worked pretty much on the same premise except a few changes. So the government used this moment. This was a time when there was a big shift over in Indian government from 8 years of Congress rule to now the Hindu nationalists in power. They wanted to rebatch it, but combine the rebatching, and this, kind of new rebranding with shifts in the way that were administrating it. Because by making it bigger, you're going to spend more money, so they had to have savings somewhere. And how do you save? You make it more efficient. How do you make it more efficient? By making some essential changes. So what are these changes? The changes are that you replace a smart card with an online biometric identification, and that you replace kind of state-based identification of beneficiaries by nation-state identification, right? So these are the two processes that changed. So when the insurance was launched for the first time in 2008, that's how it worked, right? You kind of had a food ration from the public distribution system. People have like a ration booklet. Take this ration booklet to the enrollment station. You have to bring your whole family. That in itself is a bit of a problem. So it wasn't easy that time. So you assembled your family came, everyone had a fingerprint, then you get the smart card, everyone's fingerprint is on there, and then with this card you can go to any participating hospital, private and public, and then the card is just slid into a card reader. You identify with your biometric fingerprint as a patient, you're listed on this card, and then you get this treatment. Now none of that is as seamless as it seems. There's a whole book about it, but I'll not bore you with the details. So one little vignette will allow me that. So we've done this 2008. We're in 2009 now. So let's change the scene and visit the insurance registration counter at a hospital. An elderly man with an unsteady gait approaches the counter. Squeezed in among many others, potential claimants, he looks lost and scared. Clearly feeling uncomfortable in the situation. There's this point I just sat there behind the counter and I just photographed the faces, like hundred of faces of people kind of doing this biometric identification. And while we obviously can't publish them, I mean they're confidential, you can see something from the way they look, right? You will look. When he presents his card, the receptionist slides it into a card reader and asks him to press his finger against the optical scanner. In response, the man simply stands there and looks lost. To help him, a middle-aged man next to him demonstrates what to do by lifting his hand in an exaggerated gesture with the thumb pointing up, and then slowly turning it down and pressing it against an imaginary object. And then pointing to a blue device on the counter that indicate the elderly men should use this same device. So the old man watched carefully and then mimicked this silent choreography. With his own shaky hand, he slowly lifted the thumb and then pressing it into the glass of the blue gadget with great concentration. On the other side of the computer, the receptionist stares at the screen, and after a short delay, shakes his head. This did not work. He instructs the man to wipe his hands and try again. However, things do not go smoothly. After 3 failed attempts, the receptionist resolutely shakes his head, indicates that the man should leave, as the finger could not be read. And while some were still kind of trying to explain to the old man what happened, others already pushed him aside to finally get their chance to enroll, right? So this is 2009. Now what happens is that 80% of the fingerprints failed at that point, right? This was before Aadhaar, right? So there was absolutely no kind of ground on which one could assume that this was going to work. So because it was not working, in 2010, which is 2 years hence, they relaxed the rule. And what they did is, on the card, you have the fingerprints of all the family members. These are 5 family members or 3. And so any one of these family members could now sign in for this person, who could not fingerprint. So assume an old man could not fingerprint, the son would be called and the son would do, right? So women and young men were suddenly the ones who held the power over this card. Very interesting sort of dynamic in Indian village. So now what happened is that this is a lesson learned. And interestingly, we traveled into the new biometric identification system Azadeh, and it was used also in schemes that used Azadeh, like for example the public distribution system, right? So today in the public distribution system, in many states you actually require fingerprinting at every point when you buy kind of your grains, but usually anyone in the family can do it. So often the kids are sent, or kind of some husband or some wife or some uncle or something. And then there's of course the one-time password and the other workarounds. So in other words, this clear fingerprinting doesn't work and you need a workaround. So what happened? In 2018, 10 years later, Modi re-announces the scheme, and now making it more efficient because smart cards are expensive, right? And the problem with smart cards was they had to be reissued every year. So that was not very efficient, and it was also not really helpful. So he said, we're going to make it right, we'll link it to Azadeh, but what does it mean? It means 2 things. Firstly, you have to have an Azadeh card. If you don't have one, if you're not functioning fingerprints, it doesn't work for you. Second, that if you have an Azadeh card, it again links the scheme to you personally. So since there's no proof that you're my daughter, you could not sign in for me, but I stand with my own number, my own biometrics. So in a revolving door, you actually kind of create the same mistake that you've already eradicated, and that much for linear time, right? Now the second thing that they did was that they said, it's very inefficient for all the states to decide how they're identifying beneficiaries. Now the public distribution system is state-based, and it is the best database you get of Indian poor. It's not perfect, but it's the best you get. So states use the data from the public distribution system. Now, instead of that, they took away the right from states to self-determine, and they used it on the basis of a national survey that was done in 2011. This is like, how long ago now? 20 years. It's not been updated till now. It's a vulnerability service, a survey on which maybe 40 or 50% of the people who have a public distribution card actually are on that. So you're basically dropping 50% on the beneficiaries while you're declaring that the number is increased. Now that is a kind of a calculation, and number has increased, but it's basically kind of a technical calculation than a kind of a reality on the ground, right? So this explains why in Chhattisgarh suddenly you have half of the beneficiaries only. And it's only after the state made another rule saying that everyone who had the old card, regardless of whether they have all of this fancy new stuff, will actually get the new card as well. And it's then that they could bump it up again, right? So in other words, while today 90% have this new card, in total, if you trace it, it took them 4 years to get to this point. Now 4 years is a gap of, if you went to the hospital, you did not get free treatment. So Chhattisgarh, this is to conclude the case study, scored poorly in health insurance coverage after this event of the relaunch because, perfect. Most people did not know that, firstly they did not know that they needed a card, a new card, right? Because many people were not on the national database, because not everyone on that database had an Azadeh card, and because many could not successfully fingerprint. So in the name of efficiency, the drama of rejection endemic to the predecessor scheme had returned to a revolving door, introducing a feature that already proven to be dysfunctional. And I'm basically saying this is one example. And I would assume that all of you kind of have 100 examples of your, in your mind of how, these things kind of get updated. And so there's basically 2 things that are getting updated. One is the policies getting updated, and one is kind of the digital technology gets updated, right? Kind of you're using not this programming interface, but you're using another one, you're not using this kind of infrastructure, you're using another one, then you need a new gadget, you need a new update. So health insurance is one example of a digital public infrastructure that began to increasingly function as a stack, whereby in the new dispensation, it digitally pulled together three systems in an interoperable infrastructure, namely the poverty database, the biometric ID system, and the national health insurance. So these three had to actually align seamlessly in order for this stack to work. They all had to align perfectly in order to deliver the promised outcome, free treatment of hospital. Access achieved at one time did not last. Every time the technology was updated or the policy was changed, new challenges emerged and new requirements would be downloaded on citizens. Thus, to claim a scheme required knowledge about benefits and changes to the system, ability to navigate the vagaries of bureaucracy and digital literacy. In a nutshell, due to the complexity, fragility, and shape-shifting nature of digital objects, citizens must perform huge work that is often underscored by great anxiety and uncertainty. And the anxiety is really important. Anxiety matters. Even if this was not the subject of the text, but it could have been. Since with every update, people wonder whether the new prompts they are given are authentic or fake. So if you do interviews today in Village, people, because so many have been duped, they say like, oh, now I've got an SMS that I have to update this, but I don't know whether this is fake or true. So they don't click on links. They've learned to not click on them because people have lost money doing this. But then when it is a link that they're actually supposed to use, and how are you supposed to know, right? Like, it's semi-literate. How are you supposed, we struggle with this, right? All the emails we get in the spam, and what is authentic, what is not authentic. Like, how is it a kind of a villager in any other places where you guys are working, going to score? So in other words, it's not just work intensive, it not just creates gaps, but it's an emotionally extremely daunting process where you constantly have to kind of figure out, like, is this fake, is this not fake? Ranjit Singh, many might know him, has kind of written a few amazing texts, calls this work articulation work. And he basically leads in this new article he published in 2024. He leads on Julia Eliasha, is that how you pronounce her? It's an Egyptian name. He speaks of the fatigue labor of state building, and I kind of like this fatigue labor, or the labor of articulating the state in the concrete context of a specific situation. His article focuses on the role of intermediaries for performing this work. My argument is more general, which means I disregard the question of who performs the labor to assert that in the digital era of digital public infrastructure, from a client's point of view, the need for articulation work has expanded and become more uncertain. This is particularly true because clients of public and private services now interact primarily with a set of pre-programmed, highly standardized prompts, which need to be continuously met in order to move things forward. To fill in the digital form requires an up-to-date infrastructure, the right configuration of software, access to quick internet, an ability to meet the specifications demanded by the platform's mass, something that cannot be taken for granted, especially when uploading images. I don't know whether you've done this. I mean, the new ESA for kind of traveling through the UK. This is not the right image, not this image, that image. No, bring this, bring that. No, take a selfie now, do this, and then, oh, this file is too big, this file is too small. Just so you get it right. And then I have 3 secretaries to do it for me. Like, what do I do? Even without a secretary, I won't be able to do it. So, to conclude, DPIs have revolutionized governance, not because they brought justice, but because of their ability to function as a new total infrastructure. And they can do so when making interoperability a key concern. However, rather than being an outcome of e-governance, interoperability is a prerequisite for it. Right? So this talk was about making interoperability happen and what all it takes for that. Computer operators use the term harmonizing when they bring together data from different places to create a single source of information. Here, The term may serve as a heuristic to draw attention to the range of activities that expand and streamline the provision of private and public services by overcoming the myriad obstacles that impede the flow of data and the movement of things. Precisely because digital government seeks to harmonize the way things are done across large territories and in relation to multiple domains, the range of things that they can do to facilitate transaction has multiplied. Because DPIs are what Bialski calls good enough. Did you know that? Yeah, it's a brilliant study. So, because DPIs are good enough, which means in computer parlance, they are good enough to function until the next update, right? This is what she says, this is her works, right? This is about programming, right? So, DPIs are good enough, which means good enough to function up to the next update, or whatever the next patch. Digital infrastructures are precarious achievements. They work reasonably well when all the necessary components are functional. Each change sends ripples through the network system and has consequences for the three components of the DPI, which is how are they digital, which publics do they involve, who actually is member in this public, and what kind of infrastructure are they, which needs some more theorizing, though I'm trying to do this. So speed and centralization, two features of digital systems, are advantageous when seeking efficiencies, making savings and implementing changes. However, they are disadvantageous when it comes to troubleshooting, accommodating necessary exceptions, and exercising discretion. All of which are necessary actions to avoid the pitfalls of management so that it can realize the spirit of any project rather than just its letter.
Thank you, Ursula. This was fascinating, and it's amazing to hear how you have developed your talk from, I think, last year. We heard an early version of this. It's fantastic. So, now we have about 20 minutes on the next session. So we'll move on into the next set of presenters with Fenna chairing this session, and then we will have our coffee.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So we're going straight through with the first session of paper presentations. And this one is about digital governance and state power. So we'll have 5 presentations. First will be Silvia Masiero from the University of Oslo, then Meenakshi Ahujan, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing it, the University of Oxford, Azadeh from the Goethe University in Frankfurt, Vidisha Shadwili and Lisa from Amsterdam, and then Catherine Chung at Chinese University in Hong Kong. We'll have about 12 minutes for presentation. I'll signal time, like when time is running out, and hopefully we'll have a very interesting Q&A afterwards. If I could welcome Silvia to first. So Silvia will be presenting on digital ID and welfare, understanding data harm.
I don't know whether
Connect to the computer?
Yes, please, thanks so much. The Italian that possesses USB.
No worries.
So you have learned music Italian time?
Dutch time, I'd say.
Okay.
This is why I'm having a Dutch person chair.
That's a bit of a challenge in that case. Okay, so let's do this. So, yes, good morning. It's a big emotion, actually. I think I should put this in presentation mode to start with. Yes, perfect. So big thanks. It's a bit of an emotion to have the opportunity to open this panel. I'm Silvia from the University of Oslo. I want to do something very new for me today, so introduce the new project I'm working on, and I'm delighted to do it with you. So big emotion, but a quick couple words on myself. I'm an associate prof of information systems at the University of Oslo. Information systems is a bit of a strange beast as a field, so I understand we have a very multidisciplinary audience today. Also, I'm a fellow friend, so big thanks to for giving me the opportunity to share these ideas with you today. I wanted to begin my short thought provocation, so I can start mention this more as a thought provocation for the panel than like a proper presentation, by briefly introducing who we are as information systems domain. We are a domain that for a long time has been preoccupied with this idea of dark side of technology. So dark side as, in a way, a broad collection of negative phenomena associated with the use of IT. I am known for my frank opinions. I always had a problem with the idea of dark side because a lot of what I observed, most of my research, connecting closely to what Ursula just discussed, a lot of my research is on digital ID and social welfare. Also a lot of my research lies on food security programs, also in southern India, and in context where digital ID has been associated not so much, that's what I said before, a bit of a sad research from time to time, but not so much with the positive outcomes of tech, but very much with what my field, information systems, calls aside. Well, I wrote a little book published last year. Its name is Unfair ID. I call it my baby. And what I sustain in the book is, some of you have heard the book talk many times, so I won't bore you with that again. But what I sustain in the book is that perhaps talking about aside is not so enough. It doesn't really cover the problem in front of us. Why so? I think so. It's a book preoccupied with digital identity systems, so broadly defined as systems that convert human identities into machine-readable data. And it's a book it has a happy conclusion because its longest chapter is called Imagining Fair ID, so building on a scientific understanding of unfairness to imagine fairer ways in which digital ID can be thought out. But this is a book very much centered on what I call legal, informational, and design-related forms of injustice. So it looks at not only and not so much at digital exclusion, but in the way in which, for example, from an informational perspective, what information is lost, what information is gained, not so much is gained when identity moves to a digital space. What forms of injustice can, for example, be directly designed in the technologies we look at? And I was thinking which examples to make, and Ursula already made sadly splendid, I would say, examples of how injustice can be directly designed into a digital identity system. Now the big question is, and this is what I'm doing for the first time, so again, huge emotion here, what is beyond unfair ID? It's it's my first book, so I'm in the middle of my first book tour, which is a lot of emotion. I have no idea how to do a book tour, but yes, there is a lot of learning by doing. While having the opportunity to discuss the book and its idea with audiences from very much around the continent, this is the main question that sort of came up. So not so much what to do about unfair ID, even though this is a question that I believe we will be exploring together here, but very much what is beyond and even behind, so what makes unfair ID possible. And this is where my work lies these days. So I'm increasingly looking at data, so data as representations of people, in the case of digital identity, but more at large of settings, of contexts, of environments. So data is not, of course, a new object of information systems research, but one that is emerging as a self-standing object of research. Ursula cited the work of Ranjit Singh, and this is also very much something quoted in social research on datafication. So what we are looking at increasingly is how, again, what makes unfair digital identity systems possible? What is the substratum? What is the data-related substratum that in the first place makes digital ID architectures, leads to the possibility of digital ID architectures to yield what Giulio Coppi from Access Now calls data violence, so utterly violent, utterly harmful outcomes on people and their environments. This is where, out of many ways, I always put it as there are so many ways to make sense of the problem. I propose one, and then many more will be proposed in and beyond this panel. But this is the concept I'm sort of wrestling with these days, and I'm arriving, I provisionally called it data harm. It's a very in-the-process concept that I'm again looking forward to discussing with you, but I'm looking very much at an idea of data harm as harm produced, sustained, and enacted through the means of datafication. My early definition included on people, so harm on people, and then I think in the process of the unfair ID, book 2 of someone said it's not only on people. Like look for example at programmed harm when it comes to the redistribution of food in food security systems. It's not only people, it's the very architecture of the system that results from it. For now it's three main core features that I find in this idea of data harm. They might be a lot more, but where I have arrived is three main properties, three main features of what I call data harm in this recent work. So first of all, very much not a dark side, okay? This is not a side. It's harm produced, and I cite here the splendid work on design justice by Sasha Costanza-Schock. So very much harm produced through the core of the system. So what Ursula just described are not systems that incidentally bar people out. There is a very programmed way to enact harm. Here, it is harm that builds on design on data injustice, Linet's work on visualization, representation, and people through data. Again, unfair ID, 5 minutes Italian. Okay, 5 minutes Dutch. Again, Unfair ID is very much a book on ID instantiations of harm. But I see very much a link between data injustice and actual harm on people. And I realize now that perhaps this one has got to be first, because this is perhaps the key of the problem. It is a type of harm that is inherent to technologies of datafication. Put it the other way around, we wouldn't have the same type, for example, design injustice of ID schemes on people if we didn't have this, if we didn't have the conversion of people into data. Now, what am I trying to do these days, and I promise it is a happy conclusion, is this. So this is the question that keeps me awake at night these days, how to map different ways, not exhaustively maybe, but different ways to make sense of the problem. So how is data harm inherently produced? So far this is where I got. So far these are three main ways. I call them for now misrepresentation, erasure, and misused interoperability. I'll use my last couple of minutes to run through them. But these are, like in the body of, I call it being in the world of data research. So it is my field data, but very much relying on works from the community. I'm very much seeing at least the three ways that we can arrive at this data harm problem. I call the first one misrepresentation. So we look here at conversion of people into machinery. So, oops, a lot of harm even there. So this is very much what we, this builds on what in Unfair ID I call design injustice. Okay, the moment in which the very conversion of people or objects into data through representation ends up in harmful outcomes. For example, in the moment in which I'm profiled in a certain way, and that particular profiling results in receiving or not receiving certain entitlements. So there is a hole, and in a way, I think a lot of digital ID research is here, is how being represented or being misrepresented results into harm. What I am finding, however, is that misrepresentation is a lot the tip of the iceberg. There are at least two more roads that my work is currently exploring. One of them I provisionally called it data harm through erasure. So what sort of information is lost when we convert people or objects into data. I'm thinking again of an example from India. I think in the state of Tamil Nadu, the same system you just spoke about, Ursula, the public distribution system, is moving to QR codes. And one of the findings from there is that the problem is that the disappearance of the stamp on the ration card, what you just described, is resulting in a lack of bargaining power from the person. The person cannot anymore go and show, oops, there is not a stamp that shows the delivery of food, and so I need food this month, because it's now a text message. Yeah, but I cannot show the lack of a text message, can I? So this is what I mean by erasure. Last one, and I finish here, is what we, for now, and I'm juggling a lot with names here, I'm looking at misused interoperability. A lot of us that I recognize in the room work with systems, for example, databases, for example, displaced people databases that communicate with each other. There is a huge body of work on what in Kenya is called double registration, so people that have been profiled as refugees and cannot for that reason receive a national identity card, with the loss of rights that the lack of a national identity card implies. So that's not just one example, and I'll stop here and we will discuss more. But this is another note, okay? So interoperability, that in my IS information systems field is such a positive word, ends up actually producing the lack, the systemic lack of rights for people. This is where my time ends. I only have one question, and that is, do you wish to know more? Yes. In that case, do you want to hear the news? But don't tell anybody, because kind of a open secret. If you wish to know more, there is a next book in the making. It's called Data Stories, and it should be out next year. And with this, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Silvia. Perfectly within Dutch time. Next up is Azadeh. So Azadeh from Goethe University will be presenting on uneven datafication. Do you... Sorry?
I don't know.
Oh yeah, but I think your laptop can connect, right? It's the easiest. Oh.
Okay, hello everyone. It's very nice to have a lot of friendly faces in this room. My work is very theoretical. I'm just presenting part of a 12,000 word paper, so it's going to be very boring, and I normally don't read out from notes, but I think it would be better, otherwise I would lose the thread of thought. So the paper that I'm writing is actually in 3 sections. The first section situates current debates on the end of capitalism and techno-feudalism and their conceptual and historical limitations. So while these theories, such as Mackenzie-Wart's work, argue that new class antagonisms have emerged around information control and unpaid labor, others suggest a regression to rent-based feudal dominance by powerful tech firms. Both perspectives, however, I argue, construct universal narratives rooted in Western experiences, often neglecting the colonial history and the structural unevenness that shape digital capitalism. The second part of the paper, I provide a critique of the principal arguments of data colonialism through conceptualizing a more comprehensive account of uneven datafication. I do this by drawing mainly on the work of Coldry and Matthias Smith's seminal work on the structural unevenness of capitalist development and Samir Amin's work on uneven development, especially for its creative theorization of class and unequal exchange. And both of these parts, I have no time in 10 minutes to talk about this, so I'm going to focus on the third section, which is the subject of the talk today. I describe 4 interrelated dimensions of uneven datafication as colonial continuities, so the persistence of extractivist and epistemically violent relations rooted in imperial and colonial histories now transposed into digital infrastructures and knowledge production. And then I'll talk about dispossession, unequal exchange, and spatial differentiation. So to give you a quick insight to what I mean by uneven datafication, it is a manifestation of uneven development within the contemporary political economy of data. It illustrates how global cycles of internal differentiation and totalization perpetuate unevenness to sustain capitalist structures, and it also captures how datafication is not a homogeneous planetary condition, but one marked by deep colonial continuities, spatial differentiation, and temporal unevenness. In short, uneven datafication designates the way data capitalism reproduces and intensifies global inequalities, sustaining capitalist accumulation through differentiated forms of dispossession and dependency across classes, populations, and geographies. So some of the characteristics of uneven datafication, the first one is dispossession, and a lot of people who have worked on data colonialism have worked with David Harvey's accumulation by dispossession. Zuboff also talks about surveillance capitalism, for example, in this context, and although her work is not about a critique of capitalism per se, they use the concept of dispossession for different purposes. For this reason, Colby and Mejias, I think, rightly criticize accumulation by dispossession for failing to grasp how the axis of capitalism's expansion has transformed and shifted to positioning human life as a new raw material subject to capitalist exploitation. Building on this framework, I revisit the concept of dispossession to argue that data colonialism not only targets human life, but also redefines humanity, ranking certain lives as less human than others. So I take the idea of dispossession to psychopolitical realms. I use Butler and Athanasiou's work with dispossession, and they say that it involves processes and ideologies by which individuals are disowned and abjected by normative powers that govern cultural intelligibility and regulate vulnerability. These powers determine the terms of subjectivity, survival, and livability, which extend beyond the loss of land and community to encompass more intimate forms of ownership, such as the historical control over one's living body as seen in slavery systems or as we see it in Gaza today. Their interpretation of dispossession moves beyond the loss of material resources to consider the psychosocial ramifications of becoming dispossessed, a condition derivatively created by deprivation of land, but also rights, livelihood, desire, or modes of belonging. So this conceptualization broadens the scope of data colonialism and digital dispossession, arguing that they extend beyond simple data extraction to fundamentally alter the very condition of subjectivity itself. Another important characteristic of uneven datafication is uneven exchange, and the concurrent differentiation and universalization functions based on the universality of value, as Smith argues. In a data-driven and financialized world, as Wark says, nobody knows what anything is worth. It's very hard to put a value on things. So this fluidity of value is well reflected in the data brokerage market. As you can see here, it's constantly growing, and it's projected to be around $585 billion in 2034. And interestingly, despite such grandiose numbers, data is still missing from the economic equations in calculating GDP of countries. Multiple methods have been offered for the valuation of data, including those that argue that data rents alone account for more than 2% of GDP in the US. Data rent here is calculated not only through direct transactions, but also by optimizing business processes, capturing consumer surplus, allowing firms to exploit information asymmetry for market advantages, shifting innovations into machine learning space, which in effect permits the industrialization of learning, accelerating the process of innovation, and providing a speed advantage to firms that are able to harness this element, and creating machine knowledge capital as a new factor of production. In this manner, data rent has value because of the intrinsic unevenness of the environment it has been produced through the free data harvest from us, from the users, and the asymmetry of information it can produce. There's a very interesting report on unequal exchange and north-south relations by Nivas and Piketty, and they construct a new database on global data flows and the world balance of payments from 1800 to 2025. It's a really interesting read. And their striking yet expected finding shows unequal comparative development largely stems from unequal exchange, in the sense that a different set of trade rules and institutions could have led to a different pattern of comparative development and could contribute to do so in the future. If you read the report at the end, they do also some sort of a thought game, and they see if the price of primitive goods were not set by world powers, and obviously you can see that countries in East Asia, Africa, and Latin America would be in a very different place if this has happened. And finally, I argue sort of against Kudri and Mejias that they differentiate between old and new colonialism, that the spatial aspect of data colonialism is still relevant and important. And I do that in different sort of scales. I know for geographers, scale is very controversial. But the first level for me is the code body, and I draw on the work of Kitchen and Dodge on this, that there is a co-construction of code and body in the current environment of data's political economy. As you can see in this picture, I don't have time to go through everything. The iris scan and receiving humanitarian aid is becoming a normal practice now for the UNHCR, and the body becomes part of the digital infrastructure. It's not really separate from it anymore. A lot of people have written about smart city enclaves, and if any doubts remain regarding the colonial continuities embedded within data capitalism, the recent rhetoric of Donald Trump entailing proposals to purchase Greenland, annex Canada, turn Gaza to the Middle East Riviera, and seize control of the Panama Canal, provides a clear indication that geographical expansion is ongoing and does not belong to the past. It is no coincidence that the PayPal mafia, through its Praxis network state, is planning to establish its first city in Greenland, actually, as part of a broader agenda to reclaim the West. So this ideology of total planetary computation mirrors colonial ambitions, maximizing profit through geographical expansion, exploiting both humans, bodies, but also natural resources. And then finally, might not be very clear at the beginning, but when you think about colonizing outer space, and they even use the verb colonizing outer space, it becomes interesting that the notion of terra nullius, once confined to the land, now extends beyond terrestrial boundaries. The race to dominate Earth's orbits for purposes such as the deployment of Starlink internet satellites or to make other planets inhabitable has become integral to the futuristic ambitions of big tech moguls, as we know by Elon Musk's SpaceX program or Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. So just very shortly, returning to the starting point of this paper, despite the unprecedented success of tech-based companies in the last decades, interestingly, the Dutch East India Company is still at the top of the list of most valuable companies of all time. To highlight such colonial continuities, this paper has expanded the concept of data colonialism and have introduced the concept of uneven datafication to describe the persistent creation of unevenness in data production and extractions operating on a multi-scalar level. To comprehend the complexities of such intricate, interrelated systems, universalist, Eurocentric descriptions of datafication do not suffice and can hardly help us resist an increasingly powerful narrative of efficiency, libertarianism, and deregulations. As both Amin and Wallerstein have demonstrated, frameworks that prioritize Western experiences fall short of accounting for the perspectives of the majority world. In that sense, uneven datafication not only exposes the aggressive extraction of data from all individuals, but also underscores how this production of unevenness leads to the social disposability of certain communities even within the global north. Thank you.